Welcome to Stories of Creativity. I'm your host, Jo Vertis, and my guest today is Dr. Tibra Ali. Tibra is a theoretical physicist, a photographer, and a writer. He's a professor and associate dean of research in the School of Data and Sciences at BRAC University in Dhaka, Bangladesh. He's also chairman and co-founder of Tensor, a faculty-founded startup college in Bangladesh. Tibra taught physics at Perimeter Institute in Canada for many years. He's an international lecturer, and he enjoys teaching advanced physics topics to graduate students, as well as giving talks on physics to lay people. I was a young composer when we met over 20 years ago, and it was talking to Tibra that made me first realize science is a creative field. We've had a lot of interesting conversations about creativity over the years, and I'm really excited to have this one today. Tibra, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Would you define for us what theoretical physics is and explain why it's a creative field?
So theoretical physics is a branch of science which deals with the kind of possible physical structures that can exist. It doesn't mean that it has to exist in our reality or our universe, but physics as a field has some kind of a mathematical structure. We don't really know why, but it does. So that constrains the kind of physical theories you can have. So what theoretical physics does is that, building on the principles of physics that we already know, it imagines systems which could exist in theory. So that is broadly what theoretical physics is about. It doesn't mean that it doesn't deal with systems that already exist. It does that too. But theoretical physics is more concerned, even when a system does exist in our universe, theoretical physics is more concerned about describing it mathematically rather than, and not worrying at the moment whether experimentally you can make contact with that.
Interesting. And so what makes it creative?
That's an interesting question. So you can solve, like, people who are not scientists, they think that when you're trying to, say, solve a scientific problem, there's only one way of approaching it. There's only one solution. But that's actually not the case. Many times you can get to the solution of a scientific problem or to the answer of a question in more than one way. So I guess there is a creative aspect to that. Depending on what your skill set is, you are moving through a certain trajectory towards the answer. But there's another aspect to it that, what are the questions that you're asking, right? What are the questions that you think are important? And, for example, this is analogous to, say, an artist thinking about what are going to be her themes, what are the subjects, and by subjects, I mean it very broadly, that she is going to be thinking about for the next, say, few years or something like that. So in theoretical physics, for example, right now I am getting interested in a certain field called quantum chaos. And so I'm asking questions about, that are like, suppose I want to understand this aspect of quantum chaos rather than this other aspect, which other people are maybe asking. So I think in all these choices lies your creative, inclination, right? Because it depends on what are the questions that attract you, what are your skill set, like how that also depends. The questions you're going to ask also depend on your skill set or what are the skills you want to acquire, because a lot of times you ask a question and you don't know how to answer it. So that means you have to learn new things, right? So I don't know if I'm giving you I mean, the thing is that creativity is a hard thing to quantify and describe, right?
Right.
So unlike, what people think, science is like scientists are very passionate people. The questions that they're attracted to, they are questions that excite the scientists, you know, and the methods, the tools that they use, these may look like they're just hard cold theorems coming from calculus or whatnot, but the tools themselves for the scientists hold a lot of emotional charge, just as an artist might be attracted towards a certain set of tools, right? So I think that there is much parallel between science and art and the arts. If I may paraphrase Saint-Exupéry, a poet that I really like, when he was accepting the Nobel Prize for poetry, he made reference to the work by Albert Einstein, and he said that like the poet and the scientist, they are exploring the same abyss. It's just that their tools with which they are exploring the abyss is different.
Beautiful. I love that. Would it be fair to say that physics endeavors to describe the reality of the physical universe we're in?
Yes, of course. That is, in some sense, physics's MO.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that physics has to be, especially theoretical physics, has to be limited to doing that. Sometimes there's a happy coincidence, or just something much deeper, where something that physicists come up with without actually having any specific physical evidence for it, and then it turns out to be true for a physical universe. So let me give an example of that. The 20th century can be described, by the twin discoveries of physics. One was Einstein's special theory of relativity, which of course later led to general theory of relativity. And special theory of relativity comes up with a very novel structure of space-time. There is no such thing as absolute time or absolute space. And at the same time, around the same time, people discovered quantum mechanics. But quantum mechanics and special relativity it did not seem to kind of go hand in hand. And the founders of quantum mechanics found it difficult. And so their quantum mechanics was something that was more consistent with the view of space-time, which was Newtonian, where time had an absolute position, where space was relative. So in the 1920s, a young British physicist, actually late 20s, early 30s, a young British physicist called Paul Dirac, he tried to combine the two. So his motivation for doing this was that, well, these two great principles of physics, modern physics, should be unified in one equation. So many have tried to do that before him and failed. And Dirac not only succeeded, he found an equation for a charged particle, which we now know as the electron. It could be other charged particle too. But Dirac's equation gave him another solution, which was spurious, which did not seem to exist in the universe. And so it predicted a particle which had all the had the mass of the electron, the magnetic moment and everything, but had the opposite charge. So Dirac called it a hole because he had a very picturesque way of seeing reality as being filled with electrons that we cannot see. But when one of the electrons is removed, it leaves a hole behind, and that hole acts as a positively charged particle. Anyway, but right around that time, that particle was actually discovered in cosmic ray, which has almost so it's the electron's antiparticle, which we now call positron. So this is an example where Dirac was motivated by a principle of elegance and symmetry, but ended up discovering antiparticles, antimatter, which is something we know exists. So even though, so yes, theoretical physics wants to describe the universe, but when it asks questions which are abstract, which may not necessarily be directly connected to the universe, sometimes the universe chooses to make that a reality.
Beautiful. That's really interesting. I know that you've read the book I wrote about creativity, and in it I was describing kind of how I shifted in my creative life from asking things like, what can I do that's never been done before? How can I be more original? To just asking, what if I tried this? Or what if I tried that? What would happen? And really tapping into a curiosity in the generation of creative ideas, in that part of the process. I feel like that might be something that the arts and sciences share in terms of the creative spark that gets you to new places, curiosity, and asking, what if?
No, I agree. And it's just that neither the artist nor the scientist, live in a vacuum, right? They are part of a tradition of people, right? Mm-hmm. So they are influenced by the historical moment that they reside in. And so they don't have to be scholars. That's the whole thing. They don't have to be someone who knows exactly everything about their field. They have to be certainly knowledgeable to a certain extent. But so they have, because if you haven't really done science before, if you haven't done arts before, you can't really create new stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But yes, rather than trying to be exactly like, oh, what can I do that has never been done before? You can kind of, it's a very, very, at least in science, that's a very difficult question. So there are outstanding problems. So there are outstanding problems in science, and you can try to say, okay, I'm going to solve this problem. So that's one approach, and a few scientists and mathematicians have gone like that. For example, Andrew Wiles, a mathematician who is now known for solving Fermat's last theorem, which is a very famous theorem, which was unsolved, a very famous conjecture that was unsolved for many, many years. And Andrew Wiles, as a kid, decided to make that into his career. But then he forgot about it. And then when he was already a professor at Princeton, it turned out that he was specializing in a certain field, and somebody, like two other mathematicians, discovered that this famous theorem was exactly related to the field that he was an expert on. So suddenly his skill set became relevant for solving the problem that he had dreamt of solving as a kid. And then he did. It took him 7 or 8 years or something, a long time, but he did. But the point there is that, that's probably not the approach that everyone takes. Most people are like, okay, I've learned this thing. I'm working with this professor, and I find these group of ideas interesting or beautiful. Let's see what I can do. So you kind of follow your nose. You ask what if questions, exactly. And the what if questions are very important because so early in my career, I learned that it's better question to ask, what would happen if I did this, rather than asking if this is true.
Oh,
because when you ask a question, if this is true, then when the answer is no, often it's not publishable. But when you ask a question, what will happen if I do this? You are being much more open. You are being much more broad. And so whatever comes up, you're able to accept it. And I mean, you're still being critical, but you're able to accept it, right? So even if it doesn't fit with your preconceived notion, right? So
very nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You also write, and you write poetry, and you work with the photography medium quite a lot. What have you noticed in terms of the differences and similarities between using your creativity in all of these different applications?
So as a photographer, I'm really an amateur photographer. I don't know. And poetry, I'm an occasional poet. So, but yeah, I've dabbled in, I would say I've dabbled in fiction, I've dabbled in poetry and photography. And I mean, it's much more fun to do those things sometimes than physics because it's not my profession. So there's no like pressure. But I think, I mean, what I find interesting is that you kind of, when you're doing something that is, that you like, it kind of takes you out of yourself. You're no longer thinking about yourself. You're no longer, somehow the chatter in your mind kind of becomes very quiet. I mean, there's another conversation which arises, but that conversation is about, how can I understand the nature of this thing, right? That is in front of me. How can I try to understand the nature of this equation? Or how can I say, what would be the right framing of this beautiful set of buildings? Or if you're taking portrait photos, you're looking for that moment where, that your subjects are relaxed and they're kind of, expressing themselves. They're most expressive, right? So you are kind of going out of yourself and trying to discover something outside yourself. But at the same time, you are also engaging because it's really what's the chemistry, the magic is happening inside you. But you're not forcing it, right? You're not forcing it. It's your unconscious mind, which is somehow driving the process, right? Or some combination of your conscious and unconscious mind. So psychologically, I think it's very, very similar, and somewhat beautiful. And in all of these fields, there are these aha moments where you had a question or you're grappling with a problem, and suddenly you see that, oh, this isn't something I didn't notice. There's a little like chink in the armor, and that kind of opens up the problem a little bit more. And that happens in physics, and that happens in writing. You're trying to create a certain ambience, or in your short story, or you're trying to convey a certain feeling, and you're just struggling with it day after day. And then sometimes it just like, something opens up, or when you're least expecting it, inspiration comes, right? And that's because your unconscious mind is engaged, even if you are not as a conscious in the conscious way.
So true. Yeah. Do you find those aha moments come oftentimes while you're just doing something mundane? Doing the dishes or walking or whatever?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, yesterday I had one of those aha moments, not a big one, but a small one, but it was still very nice because, I was trying to derive a formula. I was trying to derive a result from two different formulae, and they were each giving different results, and which were not contradictory. And then suddenly I realized that one of the formulae I was using was not the correct one. There is something which is more general, and I should be using that. And when I did that, yes, the result seems to match. And that it's a very small observation, but it was a very pleasing moment. It was, and I guess I usually use pens to do my calculation, but yesterday I was using pencils. I was using this pencil. It was a mechanical, semi-mechanical but wooden pencil from Muji. Maybe, I don't know, it was the pencil, the tactility of the pencil that helped me, It was very nice.
That's such an interesting point.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it depends what tools you use, right? I mean, I use a lot of, I use computers. I do a lot of scientific programming as well. So, yeah.
Like you say, this aspect of creativity where you're very much in the moment, in the present, and aware of things that you're not normally aware of. If you're more focused on yourself or the future or the past or whatever our minds get tangled up in, that's really a mindfulness practice. And so the tactileness of whatever materials you're working with can help your mind focus in on the present moment. So maybe that is a really good way of unlocking a creative idea.
Right. It's not just the tactility, but it's also like the setting, right? I mean, are you working in your usual office, or sometimes you get an idea? I mean, Cal Newport says that, sometimes you should kind of remove yourself from your usual surroundings. And maybe, you should go to a cafe to do a certain single thing. Don't take your whole everything, and just take the notepad for that. Mm-hmm. And then I remember it was during my postdoc, and I was really frustrated because I was reading a certain set of papers, and I was kind of circling around if an idea that I couldn't really get a grasp on. And then it was it was an overcast day, not the nicest day, but overcast day. And I was at Common Grounds, which is the cafe that, where I met you. It's that so many years ago, Common Grounds. Mm-hmm. And I was in the side room where back then I used to smoke. And so I had this idea, then I did a very short calculation, like, does this work? And it kind of did. It was just like half a page or something, very, very simple calculation that I did. And that really led me to a major project that became, my first published mathematics paper. So, it was really at Common Grounds that I came up with that idea that then went on to become something that was significant for me, right? So you never know where your ideas might come from. A lot of times they come very, very in a mundane way. Mm-hmm. Like maybe you're in an office, and you're trying to work, and that's when it happens. So a lot of times for me, ideas come when I'm reading other people's papers. And, basically I get what if questions. I think these things come from beyond us in some sense. So by that, I mean beyond the conscious mind.
Okay.
It could come from within, or, depends on your metaphysics, right? How you ascribe the source.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything else you can offer on that topic? Because I think it's really interesting. I think most creatives have that experience and maybe some awareness of that, but it is hard to describe or define.
So, I mean, I have another experience from my childhood, almost youth. Like, I wrote a short story many years ago, decades ago. And I knew it was incomplete. I knew it kind of, it was a science fiction fantasy. And then I let it like rest. And then I think, and then I went on with my life, and for several years went by, and I became, I learned about a lot of new literature stuff, and I started writing poetry because I met a bunch of poets and they taught me the Bengali prosody and stuff like that. And then I came across the short stories of Jorge Luis Borges, and I realized that the kind of his voice is something that really spoke to me. And so I read him a lot, and then I started thinking of the short story that I had written several years back. And then I knew that it had to have an extension, and then what happened is that suddenly, once in a while, I would get an image or a sentence out of nowhere come to me, which I knew belonged to that story. And usually they would happen at night when I'm going to bed. And I would just like, oh, nice. I wouldn't do anything. So, and then one night, as I went to bed, after I went to bed, I got a line, a sentence, and then a bit later, another sentence came. And they were just like coming to me from outside myself. It was one of the strangest things. So that night, I realized, okay, this is the night when I have to do this. So I got up and I spent the whole night. In my childhood, the flat that I used to live at that point, my bedroom, there was like a really rickety old round table, in addition to my desk. So I wrote it on the desk, and so I finished it. When I finished it, so I wrote the whole story in one night, and when I finished it was like in the morning. And I was so happy, I had tea, and I don't know if I had a cigarette or something. I used to smoke back then. And then I just like went to bed in the morning. So I woke up very late that day, and my best friend at the time, who was a poet and who was also an editor, so he would drop by all hours of the day. I mean, my door was always open, people like. So I woke up to find him sitting at my round table and reading the the story I had written the night before, and he really liked it, and he said, "Look, I want to publish it." So he did. But it was just like one of the most amazing. It has never happened to me since then.
Really?
Oh no, maybe once. Yeah, once more. I wrote a poem which also came to me again in the middle of the night. But never again did something so magical and beautiful happen to me.
Wow.
So yeah.
Circling back just a little bit, you mentioned that you feel maybe a little bit more free, or it's a different experience working with writing and photography than it is the profession you were educated in that is your career. Working in other art forms, writing and photography, how has that influenced the way you experience yourself and your creativity within physics? If it has.
I don't think it has directly, not consciously. But what I have kind of discovered is that I have become a lot more forgiving about myself, of myself. So it has actually helped me even in physics. And so, as you say, if you're trained in a certain discipline, you know what the standards are. And you are also trying to belong to a certain class of people. You want to be accepted by that community. It's a very small community or a large community, but so there are these kind of rules that you have to play by. And the thing about other creative field is that, which are not your main profession, is that you don't have those obligations, right? So so you're doing it for the pure pleasure of it. You're being a hedonist. So I think the trick is, when you're doing physics, which is my field, and you really have to rediscover that. You have to say, when you're actually doing the work, you have to be, again, a hedonist. You're doing it for its own pleasure. Now, whether you've discovered something that is worth publishing or not, whether it's going to help you with the next promotion or not, that is a separate thing. And there are anxieties, and there are fears, and there are all kinds of, like stuff that is, that determines the value of what you've discovered, right? Or the perceived value of what you've discovered. But you should realize that the perceived value has nothing to do with its intrinsic value, because its intrinsic value is the value that it has to you. The market value it does, of course, that's important to other people, but that's not why it's important to you. Like, I can give you some examples. One of my examples is that, so I wrote a paper with a friend of mine, with two friends of mine. And, it was during a very difficult period of my life. My father was ill and he was dying. And so I was working very closely with a friend, and we were stuck. We were like, this paper took a long time to write. We have been working on it for over a year, and we were stuck. And then my friend calculated all these things and everything was zero, right? Everything was zero, and it just didn't make sense. It was uninteresting. And so I was visiting Bangladesh at that time to visit my dad, and I was like in the room next to him, and then I realized that, okay, we are just looking at it in the wrong coordinate system. And then I started finding that it's actually not zero if you look at it in the right way. And then the major results were there, and the calculation was like, that I did was just several pages. It wasn't long. And then, it's a paper that I really enjoyed writing. And when we published it, when we submitted it for publication, it got published like that without any correction. But the paper is not highly cited. It has just a few citations. But that doesn't matter for me. That doesn't matter, because for me, I loved writing that paper, because the intrinsic value of that was that it was just a pure joy. And we found a very, like, a little gem in physics that, whether people like it or not, find it useful or not, is not the main issue. So I can give you another example, which I think is probably more relevant. And this example is that, I love teaching. A lot of my friends who do physics, theoretical physics, do research, they don't like teaching. They would rather spend all their time doing research, which I understand. But I love teaching. And when I'm teaching, I'm always learning new things. And these are not stuff that I can publish, but when I'm learning new things, it is because it is also discovery. It's something that already exists, but I am discovering it for myself, right? And there's intense pleasure in learning something that is new, that is beautiful. Maybe I've heard of this physical phenomena, but I'd never actually took the time to understand it. But here is my opportunity to, in the mental headspace, to actually get down and work through it. and that's also the pleasure of finding things out, right? And that's also so I mean, I'm just this is my way of saying that, at the end of the day, of course, you're working on the problem you're working on, or the issue you're working on may or may not be important to the wider community, but you have to sort of kind of play a game where you just don't care about that when you are working on your stuff.
Right.
Like in to be able to do that, you need a lot of time. You need to be able to dedicate time and quiet. You cannot do that if you're like always on the go, or people
Right.
are always asking you, pressuring you to do things. So at least no, that's not how I work. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you find teaching brings additional opportunities to get creative? Do you find yourself being creative in deciding how to give a lecture on a topic?
Yeah, I mean, for me, teaching is basically a way of learning stuff. And often I teach in a way that is, it's my way of learning new things. I always use some kind of books or some notes, but a lot of times I use it as a structure rather than something that I follow line by line. Teaching is always fun. Teaching doesn't always lead to like a paper, or your case it would be a painting or a piece of music, and that's why people like me, they want to teach graduate courses or graduate students, because
Hmm.
graduate students are at the level in their career where they can actually produce new results.
Right.
But I teach at an undergraduate university, like in an undergrad in a program which doesn't have so I do have some graduate students from another university, but even then, two of my undergraduate students, I gave them a paper to review as their undergraduate thesis project. This was over a year ago, and they came back and they understood the whole paper, and they actually reproduced all the calculations, and they started taking new models and applying their calculations to those new models. And then they started having all these really nice new results. So it's been over a year now, and we are in the final stages of writing a paper together, the three of us.
Oh, wow.
So
Nice.
that, yeah, for me, so the hope is that that happens with a lot of your students, but it's very hard
Hmm.
to do that with undergraduate students. But I have both undergraduate students and graduate students now, so you know maybe it'll work. So yeah, I mean, so so we are being creative in both ways, not just being.
Yeah,
I'm being creative in both ways. So yeah.
nice. If you're willing to answer this, have you ever had a sense of failure about a creative project? And how did you approach your creativity after that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I've had many failures. I tried to solve some problems that I failed at. I just move on. And sometimes you come back to it after many, many years, and you never stop thinking about it, or your unconscious mind never stops thinking about it. Some of the problems you come back to, and so one of the problems that I wanted to solve was something that was many years ago now, when I was a postdoc at Baylor, and uh, I wanted to find something, and I never found it. And this is one of those questions that I told myself I should not be asking. Like, if a certain thing exists, because the answer can be no, right? So, but if it does exist, it'll be
Mm.
very nice. And when I was a postdoc at Baylor, I couldn't find it. I tried. Recently, I started looking at that question again with a student of mine, and we haven't really figured it out yet. But I feel like now I've reached a stage in my life where even if I don't find it, it's fine. I'm not bothered about it. And but I'd like to see if it really exists or not. Because if it does, then it'll be a nice thing. So
nice. Thank you so much for watching. Part 2 of this interview will be coming out soon. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this. Have a beautiful day with your creativity, my friend. See you next time. Bye.